So we've been dealing with Psalms in the Bible, and we've been talking about Psalms that are outside of the book of Psalm, and talking about Deborah, and we talked about many other people in the Bible about how they proclaimed the Psalms. Moses' sister as well, and so forth, Miriam. And then of course we talked about several others in the past. And then now we are finally in the book of Psalm. And Psalm chapter 1, we talked about how that book of Psalms is divided up into 5 different books. How that each book is geared to teaching you about how to be as a Christian. You have the first book of Psalms. It teaches you how to be blessed, how you get downward blessings from God, how to be blessed in your life, how to have proper things happen to you in this life, to have happenstance happen for you, rather than just living life aimlessly. You learn how to draw the blessings of God down upon your life. And that's book 1, teaches you how to receive the blessings of God. Book 2 teaches you how to have upward trust, learning to trust in God, learning to trust in His plan and His divine ways of things. And so we have downward blessing, upward trust. And notice how that the blessings come from God first, and then we learn to trust. And then in book 3, it's outward realities. We start to see the reality around us, the darkness that is encroaching upon the light, and then how to, that despair that comes with seeing the outward darkness, and then the reality of God's truth dispels the darkness. So that outward reality. And then the inward shelter for the believer to have shelter in God, to learn to not only trust God and for the reality of life, but also to be protected by God in this life. You have to have the protection of God. So book 4 teaches you how to be protected by God, and then book 5 teaches you how to proclaim God's truth to the world. Proclaim God's truth to the world. And so the whole psalm is geared to teaching the children of Israel to learn to receive the blessings of God, and that blessing and cursing from Deuteronomy chapter 32. And then book 2 is to teach Israel how to trust in God for all things. Book 3 is to see the outward reality of this evil world, sinful world, and how to respond to it. Book 4 is how to be protected by God, and the book 5 is how to use the sword of the Spirit to proclaim God's truth, to free this world from sin. And so this books as a whole combine to make the book of Psalm. And of course, it is the song book. It is to be sung by every generation of believer, especially for those in Israel. And then we talked about how that while it's a whole book, that all the what they're all about are contained within chapters 1 and 2 of the book of Psalms. So chapters 1 and 2 tell you what the Psalms are about and what the goal is, what the focus is, what the end point is. Like when you start a journey, you need to know where you're going. If I'm here in Kalamazoo, in Vicksburg, I'm going to, and I want to go to a certain place, I got to know where that place is, right? If I'm going to go to Chicago or Detroit, I need to know that I'm going to Chicago or Detroit. I can't just start walking and say wherever I end up, that's where I'm going to be. You can't do that in life. You got to have a direction. And so chapters 1 and 2 tells you where you're going to go in the book of Psalms. Psalm 1 teaches you how to regulate your personal life, and the focus of the book is to teach you how to deal with your personal life and your personal standards and your personal ability. And then chapter 2 teaches you about God and His divine plan for all of humanity and all of the world. And so chapter 1 teaches you about yourself, and chapter 2 teaches you about God and His plan for the universe and the world and all that stuff and for humanity. And then from these 2 chapters, the rest of the books teach us how to apply these 2 chapters to our life and the things contained within them. And so that's what we've been doing in these books of Psalms. And then so the first psalm starts out with this. It says, "Blessed is the man." We talked about a couple weeks ago about how a man is blessed. and that he's blessed by not doing certain things. He's not blessed by not doing these 3 things in the list. And then he's blessed by, from chapter 1, you're not doing chapter 1, and then you're blessed by doing chapter 2, or verse 2. You're blessed by not doing verse 1. You're blessed by doing verse 2. And then as you continue to do verse 2, verse 3 tells you that you'll be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, and you're going to give forth its fruit in its season. And then it gives the contrast between the person who lives in verse 1 and the person who lives in verse 2. It contrasts them in the rest of the chapter. And so we're going to be looking at all of that. Last week, again, we looked at blessed is the man, and that overview. And then we looked at this last week that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. So we discussed how this person is not to walk in the counsel of the ungodly, getting advice from ungodly people. Now, not evil people, just people that do not have God in their mindset, and so forth. And so that could have a various different range. It could be people with good intentions, but they're uninformed of the true aspects of life as God reveals, or they just got something that works temporarily, but they don't understand the end result of that thing. And God says we're not supposed to take their counsel because they don't have eternity in perspective. And so the ungodly don't have God's eternal plan in perspective. So we cannot take their advice because it eventually breaks down at one stage or the other. Now, we're looking at this, nor standeth in the way of sinners today. And so we're going to be looking at the definitions. We've been looking at definitions for Webster's 1828, and it's been quite informative. So here it says, nor standeth in the way of sinners. So if you want to be a blessed person, you're not going to walk in the counsel of the ungodly, nor are you going to stand in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of the scornful. And to stand in the way of sinners means to stand by. You're going to be next to them. You're hanging out with them. When you take advice from the ungodly people, you may not be like, I don't hang out with psychologists and sociologists and people from around this world, but the way of sinners is people you're hanging out with. You got to be careful of the people you are hanging out with. You don't want to be hanging around sinners. It's not that sinners are necessarily in the human mind to be evil people, but it's people that don't take into account God's word. They don't take into account God's commands, and they violate them. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Before we knew the things of God, Christ died and loved us and cared for us. So it's not that these people are unlovable or people that we should not associate with whatsoever, but rather it is people that we are not to be hanging out with, to live in the same lifestyle with. So the definition of to stand by means to be near. Of course, that's pretty obvious. So we're near sinners. To be a spectator, we're observing their life. The life we're supposed to observe is Christ. We're not supposed to be observing the life of sinners to emulate sinners. We're supposed to emulate Christ. And so to be a spectator, to be present, you are present with them and with them, observing them and allowing them. You're not stopping them. You're not doing anything against them. You are just with them, and you are having your presence with them. And you know how oftentimes that a friend sticketh closer than a brother, and so to stand in the way of sinners is to be a brother with them, is to be in association with them, to be hanging out with them, to be near, to be a spectator, to be present. And then his sentence here, I stood by when the operation was performed. So when you're standing by, like Paul the Apostle was standing by while they stoned Stephen. Well, he didn't stone Stephen. Yeah, but he was standing by. In other words, he was with them. He was assenting to their stoning of Stephen. He was holding their cloaks. He was assisting them in this. Well, I didn't do the sin. Well, you were assisting other people in the sin. What's the common saying is that you hang out, if you hang with sinners, you'll hang with sinners. It's like it basically is like you'll partake in their crime, and you're going to be hanging in the same gallows. It's like for example, somebody robs, if a group of 5 people rob a bank, and one of that group shoots and kills a person while robbing that bank, all of them are on trial for murder. Why? Because they were standing with, or they were standing by the murderer. They were in collaboration with the murderer. And so somebody who is standing by the way of sinners is somebody who may not be doing the sin themselves, but are condoning of it, and they're hanging out with people that are in that sin, and they're allowing and enabling the sin to happen, or they are even participating in it. I stood by when the operation was performed. This phrase generally implies that the person is inactive or takes no part in what is done. In seaman's language, to stand by is to attend and be ready. You're being ready. You are you see a mob is condoning of some action. Not everybody in that mob throws the cocktail, the fiery cocktail into the store and burns down the place, or robs the convenience store. But they are in the mob allowing the event to happen. To stand by is to attend, to be ready, to be aside, to be placed aside with disregard, to maintain, to defend, or to support, not to desert. I will stand by my friend to the last. Let us stand by our country. Definition 4, to rest for support, to be supported. And so when you stand by or stand in the way of sinners, you are supporting their lifestyle, their deeds, their actions. You are consenting to it. So in the first one, you are taking their advice, not necessarily living with them. Next one, you're standing in the way of sinners. You're walking in their advice, and you're standing in their ways. And then nor saith and see the scornful, as you are positioned in their attitude of life. And we'll deal with that in a few weeks. To stand by, so we see what stand by for. And then another definition for standeth in is to stand for something. To offer oneself as a candidate. Oh, that seems like a good thing to do. I'm going to go do it. You see somebody bungee jumping. Oh, I'm going to go bungee jump off the cliff. No, thank you. But you're consenting to it. Oh, I'm not going to do it, but you go ahead and do it. That's kind of like even if we are not going to be jumping off the cliff with a bungee cord attached to us, we are consenting to somebody else doing it, and so we're standing by and watching as they do it. Oh, I'll cheer you on. So that's sometimes we got to be careful as Christians, because sometimes that's how we are in our life. Well, I'm not going to do that, but you go right ahead and do that in your life. We're standing by, we're consenting, we are allowing the thing to be condoned. So oftentimes, even to not stand is to not consent. Is sometimes they even have in one sense, to be silent is to consent. You are, and even just a word of saying, while you're going to go do that, I can't partake in that. I'm sorry, I can't do that. You are taking a stand, but you are allowing them to do what they are doing, and so forth. And we as Christians need to say, I do not consent. I do not stand by and watch you do this without speaking up and saying a word of caution to you. Hey, this is not a good thing. You think about what is that prophet's name in Samuel? Elisha. Well, not Elisha, but it's the one who had the bad sons in 1 Samuel. The bad sons, and he was raising Samuel, but he's the prophet who had bad sons, and his sons were doing evil things, and he gave them a word of caution. He says, "Why do you this evil thing?" And so forth, and he was cautioning them and against it. He wasn't standing with them, but of course he was too weak to stop it. Even though he was in the authoritative role, he should have stopped their actions because they were working as priests, but they were sinners, and he did not stand with them, but he wasn't able to stop them. So sometimes we can't stop somebody, but we don't have to stand with them and consent to their thing. Sometimes, especially today, people, it's not good enough that you are silent. They want you to consent, to stand by their sin, to agree with and to accept their sin. So we as Christians, even if we cannot stop them, we need to give a word of caution and say, I do not consent to that lifestyle, that action, that deed, because it is ungodly or it is breaking the laws of God. to stand by, to rest on for support, to be supported, to stand for, to offer oneself as a candidate. I may not be sinning, but I'd like to side with, to support, to maintain. I'm not of that persuasion, but I'm an ally. You know, you got to be careful of those things. To maintain, or to profess, or to attempt to maintain, to be in place of, or to be substitute for, a representative of. I'm not of that persuasion, but I'm going to represent it. Maybe the professor in the school that says, well, I'm not a socialist or a communist, but I'm going to endorse their actions. You know, we can learn a lot from Mao Zedong. We can learn a lot from, and then they talk about all the things, the wonderful things they can learn a lot from communism and socialism and Nazis and all these different things, whatever branch of whateverism. And they say, well, I want to do it this way, but then they endorse and they glorify and they present their way as something to be emulated. We as Christians need to be careful of what we're allowing to be emulated in our churches, around us, in our society, places that we have authority over. We need to make sure that they we are standing with the truth, not in the way of sinners. We are standing in the way of truth, not in the way of sinful things, not in the way of sin. And this definition for way, standeth in the way of sinners. The way is the manner of doing anything, the method or means of doing it. So in other words, it's the way that they do things. So we're not going to stand with the way that sinners do things. We're going to stand with the way God does things. And if that means endorsing certain people or stepping away from certain people or speaking up in a certain way, we've got to say we stand with the truth of life, of science, of God, of the Bible. We cannot endorse the delusions, that the imaginations. Remember Deuteronomy chapter 32, he says you either choose to be blessed through living the life of God, or you choose to bless your own self in your own heart through the imaginations of your own heart. And so we cannot stand as people live in the imaginations of their own heart, which is sin. So you had that choice. You be blessed by God to follow His ways, or you will bless yourself in following the imaginations of your own heart. When people follow the imaginations of their own heart, that is sin. They are following after cursing. And if you want to be if you're associated with their sin, you will be associated with something that will have curses brought upon them, rather than blessing be brought upon them. So if you want naturally, through nature, to have blessings on your life, you will not stand in the area that sins are coming down. For example, if you want to grow a crop, you're going to grow that crop where rain falls, right? But if you decide, I'm going to grow a crop in the desert where no rain falls, and I'm not even going to bring water to that desert for the rain to fall, why is my crop not growing? Why is my crop being cursed? It's because you have the crop in the wrong area. And you haven't brought, now there's a lot of people that have brought water to the desert, and that desert that could not grow anything grew a bountiful crop. Why? They brought the blessings of God with them. And of course, Jacob in the Bible brought the blessings of God to his father-in-law, where he was not a godly man, but received the blessings of God. Joseph brought the blessings of God from Canaan land down to Egypt, and Egypt, that was not a godly nation, and Potiphar, that was not a godly man, received the blessings through Joseph, the blessings of God through Joseph, because they were falling upon Joseph, and then he was blessed in proximity by being in the way of Joseph. Egypt, being in the way of Joseph, was blessed for 7 years. Even through 7 years of famine, they were continually blessed, even when the whole world was being cursed, because God was with Joseph in Egypt, and the blessings were falling upon Joseph. Egypt, in the way of Joseph, was blessed. And so too it is with the world. They had to go to Egypt, they had to go to Joseph to be blessed by God, even though the curse was fallen upon the whole world. And so in our lives as well, if God's blessings are falling down upon us, anybody in proximity will receive the blessings of God. But if you are in the way of sinners, the way of cursing, the way of God's wrath falling down upon people, you can be like Lot in the town of Sodom and Gomorrah. His life, even though he was vexed by the unrighteous deeds of the wicked and he was in their way, the mercy of God upon his life prevented him from destroying Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around it until he was departed from it. And so we see here that even in the way of sinners, if a godly person is there, even though they're vexed, can cause the mercy of God to be placed upon those sinners, and they don't receive it. And so America is a blessed nation. Why? Because we have Christians in this nation. Even though they're going the way of sin, the mercy and grace upon the believer is preventing the wrath of God from falling, because we brought, if you will, water to the desert. But to stand in the way of sin is to live in their life. And we can see that even if you have one spigot of water in the desert, you may do a little good, but you're not going to be able to water the whole desert. You're going to need a lot more water than that. And what's going to happen is that desert is going to drink up your water, and it's going to destroy your crop, and then you're not going to have a very big one, and your blessings will be wiped away through their cursing. You will not be able to stand because they're so filled with cursing. To stand to the way of sinners, the manner of doing anything, method, means of doing things, manner of thinking or behavior. So if your thinking should not be the way of the sinner, the way sinners think, it should be the way God thinks. The manner of thinking or behavior. Why is it that oftentimes that we have sinful tendencies or we struggle with sin? It's because we have the manner of thinking and behavior the way of sinners. We, as Christians, are natural, even as regular people, while before Christ saved us, we were sinners. We all are sinners. We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And we still have that thinking of the old man in our mind that causes us to struggle and to pull down the curses of God upon our lives because we continue to think in the way that we ought not. And of course, that's where the mercy of God comes from. So the manner of thinking or behavior of sinners. Particular turn of opinion, determination, or humor, the attitude. How the times that, God says to love your enemies and do good to them that despitefully use you and pray for them. And yet and then he also says, don't rejoice in the misfortune of sinners, because then God will turn away their judgment and have mercy upon them. And so our humor, our attitude towards things are oftentimes, even as Christians, not the Christian attitude or humor that we ought to have, but is based upon our attitude of being a sinner. Our sinful nature causes a sinful humor or attitude to come out. So the way means a method or manner of practice that you employ, a method or plan of life and conduct. And we talked about how that, of course, Proverbs is teaching the young man what way they should go, what path they should take, and so forth. And so we learn about all of that. So the way of sinners, nor standeth in the way of sinners. So we're not supposed to stand in the way that they're standing, in the way that they're living. What they stand for is not what we stand for. So we should only endorse and stand for things that God has called us to stand for. Now the next definition we want to look at here is the definition of sinner. Sinner is a noun. It's a description of a person. And it's a title of a person. Of course, sinner is also an action. You're actively doing something that is wrong. But it's also a noun here. It's one that voluntarily violates the divine law. Voluntarily violates the divine law. There's a law of God that says you should do this. The Ten Commandments, we all know it. Thou shalt not. And then we go off and do what those laws command us not to do. That's a violation. That's a sin. And we have that tendency to say, God says, you may eat of all the trees of the garden except for this one. Oh, I want to eat of that one. That's the way of sinners. It's to be drawn. Paul the Apostle says, I would not have known sin except the law taught me about sin. And then those things that the law talked to me about welled up within me, and I desired to do those things and to experience them and so forth, and that brought sin, in their life. They had not known sin until the law came, and that law, in order to prevent sin, brought it up in his life. So learning about sin, learning about that nature. One that has voluntarily violated the divine law, a moral agent who has voluntarily disobeyed any divine receipt. He that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. You see. So those who have voluntarily, now a lot of times that people are ungodly, but they don't understand sin in its truest form. Now, they have a sense of sin. They have a sense of right and wrong. Even the ungodly, they have it written on their hearts. But where there is no law, there is no violation of the law. And so even though you're a sinner, even though they're deaf-brained before the law, you have this tendency that people have this nature that the law is trying to stop, and that tendency is what causes them to be a sinner, and not necessarily the knowledge of the law or not. So that voluntarily violated divine law, a moral agent who has voluntarily disobeyed any divine precept or neglected any known duty. It is used in contraction to a saint. So you got sinners and you got saints. Sinners are those people that know the law, in particular in the fine tune of it, not just in their nature, but they know the law and they choose to violate the law. That's a sinner. Somebody who knows to do right and does wrong, to him it is sin. But a saint is somebody who knows the right and chooses the right. Now a sinner, are they able to do right things? Yes. When we were sinners, we chose Christ. And sometimes when we were saints, we fall into the old nature and we choose wrong. But in general, as somebody who desires to do wrong and desires to violate the will of God is a sinner, and then somebody who desires to do right and follows after the right is a saint. And so these are titles, and because but they're also actions that you do. You do more sin than sainting. Saint basically means set apart to the words of God, set apart to do those things. A sinner is one who just kind of does his own thing. And so these two distinctions between each other, saint means sanctified, set apart for the work of the Lord. So even though that they can do sin, they are set apart. Their purpose is to do the will of God. It is used in contradistinction to saint, to denote an unregenerate person. And not only is it just about somebody's lifestyle or action, it is what is ruling their heart. Is it somebody who, when they're, especially in Christianity or salvation, the Lord calls them, the law calls us and guides us to Christ, guides us to salvation. But a sinner is one who, when they are confronted with that choice, knows that they're supposed to choose Christ, and they choose not to follow Christ. In an unregenerate person, that is somebody who chooses that consistently. A regenerated person will choose to follow Christ when confronted with the gospel. One who has not received the pardon of his sin. And so you're legally, and you have the legal distinction of being a sinner, and you have the personal action and nature of being a sinner. Legally, God calls you a sinner if you have not accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior. Action-wise, you are a sinner because you commit sin. But you see the difference is that you are born in the legal sense a sinner, and your actions show that you are a sinner. Just as James says, I will show my faith by my actions. One's a legal sense, one you have internally, but the sin, the actions you perform show what's in the heart. What is in the heart of man will come out the mouth, will come out in his actions. So it is not those actions that cause you to be a sinner or a saint, but it is what is within the heart that causes you to be a sinner or a saint. And so it is issued, and we had that unregenerate person who has not received the pardon of his sin. And the third definition, an offender, a criminal. That man is a sinner. He's an evildoer. He is a criminal. Sinner is also a verb, intransitive, to act as a sinner. To act as a sinner. So we see, so we should not stand with people who are legally or morally sinners, and we should stand in the way of righteousness, to be a saint. We should stand in the way of saints. In other words, you go to church instead of bars. You go to you go where people are speaking of God rather than speaking of the devil. You go to learn morality rather than immorality. You go and stand with those people who are standing with God. We learn to stand in the right places. In the way where we stand, people we stand with, we will hang with. And so we see here, of course, the overall view of that. Now, next week we're going to be looking at this next section here, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. So first you have the walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. You're walking. You're not necessarily taking their advice. You're just walking life. I'm living life. Oh yeah, I'm walking and living. Oh, here's some advice. Okay, I'll take that. You're just walking along, and there's fruit of bitterness. Going to put that in my pocket. Oh, there's fruit of joy over here. I'm going to put that in my pocket. And you're just kind of smorgasbord, whatever. I'm living my life. If you want to be blessed, you're not going to be walking long life's road, just kind of picking and choosing, disregarding the Word of God. You are going to be perspective. You're going to have a perspective. You're going to walk circumspect. Oh, that fruit's poisonous. I'm not going to get that. You ever see poison ivy? Oh, poison ivy. I'm going to use that as a napkin. You're not going to do that. You're going to be walking the road of life, the way of life, and you're going to be circumspect. You're not going to. That's ungodly. I'm not going to receive that. I'm not going to put that in my to-go, in my heart and in my thoughts. Oh, here's something that is godly. God said this in His Word. I'm going to put that in my heart. And so that's the way of the counsel, the advice. What advice, as you walk life's road, what advice are you putting to heart? And then, nor stand in the way of sinners. Now you're not just walking, you're stopping. Oh, that looks like fun. I'm going to go do that. I'm going to live that way. Oh, I'm going to plant my roots here. You can have a tree transported on a truck, but until you stop and plant that tree, it's not going to stand anywhere. It's going to be going down the road. But once you plant it, it's going to grow deep roots there. And so you got to be considering, what way are you planted in? What way are you standing in? Are you a way of saints or the way of sinners? Well, this is not a bad thing that I'm doing. God doesn't specifically say against this, but is that action, even if it's good or bad, is it done primarily by saints or is it done by sinners? Because if it's done by sinners, then you're standing with sinners as they do supposedly this good thing. But if it's done by saints, then you got to see where you're going. So standeth means you're stopping and you're planting roots in that location. Your attitude and your morals are going to be derived from this way where you're standing. The way of sinners. Nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Now you are just sitting down. You have not only just standing there, not necessarily condoning it, but now your attitude is changing. Scorn is an attitude. You don't have joy now. You don't have love. You don't have care, but you have scorn. There's a lot of scorn going on in this world on whatever, left, right, up, down, happy, sad, whatever group you want to plant and label, and political party, moral party, or whatever of group, is they all have one thing in common, showing their worldliness, is the attitude of scorn. The Christian is not to have this attitude of scorn. We're going to deal with that next week, is that people should learn, if you are taking the counsel of the ungodly and you're standing in the way of sinners, it doesn't matter what label you put on it, the emotional result of living in these areas and then sitting, you're going to be sitting in an attitude of scorn. The world's ways, whether right, left, Republican, Democrat, liberal, libertarian, they all have the same attitude in common: scorn. The left scorns the right scorns the left, the liberal scorns the conservative, and everybody scorns everybody. Why? Because these things are not godly. These are labels people put upon each other, and then they say, oh, our fight is against that group or this group. No, our fight is against principalities and devils. It is us to rescue the sinner from the sin and the attitude of sin, and to save them. If you are a human being, we are all on the same side. There is no left or right. There is no us versus them. It is God's creation drowning in a lost world of sin. And we as their rescuers, we as people who are in the light and have the ability to rescue them, ought not to be caught up in this attitude of scorn against us versus them, and have an attitude of love, of desire for rescue. When you look at somebody who's done some heinous crime, especially we had this thoughts about this week about Charlie Kirk and about 9/11 and all these very different things that we feel like is an attack on us personally, we need to step back and ask, am I dealing with this in an attitude of scorn and hate for the other person, or sorrow of the sin that has permeated their life, so permeated their life to destroy them? A week ago we talked about how that how that Judas betrayed Jesus and allowed Satan, in this desire to betray Jesus, allowed Satan to influence his heart. We as Christians got to be careful that this attitude of scorn, which is the marker of Satan trying to influence us, does not get a foothold, and that we're not sitting around allowing it to fester in our lives. Rather than scorn, it needs to be love and joy and peace and all the fruits of the Spirit. And we're going to, through these Psalms, we're going to be learning how to integrate those into our lives, to eliminate this attitude of scorn. Yes, should we stand up against evil? Yes, should we do all these things that are righteous? Yes. But we should, while we're doing it, we have to have the fruits of the Spirit, and we can be bold and take a hard stand on certain things. But we have to do it in love and grace. Always having everything seasoned with salt. Seasoned with grace is what the Bible says. And so we got to be careful what attitude we take. And so next week we're going to be looking at this attitude of scorn and allowing it to take root in our hearts, to sit within us, to permeate everything that we do in observing other people. With that, let's consider that and be thinking about what this verse truly means, and what it truly means to live in a godly way, to be blessed by God by not doing these things. But at this moment, let's pray, and then we'll be dismissed. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this passage is given to us, Lord, the opportunity to consider the words that are listed here in the Psalm. Lord, help us to understand what advice we're taking, whether it's from the world or from your word, and to be careful of what ways we are condoning, whether it's of the saint or the sinner. And Lord, help us not to have a spirit of scorn, but to have a spirit of the fruit of the Spirit in our lives, not to look at other people as us versus them, but rather people that need to be rescued from this sin. Lord, help us to discern the difference. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.